Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. My name is Ashley and I'm a digital journalist here at UMI. Here at UMI, we help businesses by taking the hard work out of finding the very best information, expertise and finance. That's why we're here today with one of the best experts on brand management and PR. Now, before we dive in, if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to ask them, just use the chat box. Now, without any further ado, today we are here to explore how to get journalists to write your story and not theirs. On that note, I would like to introduce our guest. Today we are joined by Peter Ibbetson from JournoLink. Good morning, Peter. Could you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Good morning, Ashley. Thank you very much indeed. What a lovely morning it is. So what we do in JournoLink is we provide a PR platform for businesses who want to engage with the media. That's my day job now. But if I wind the clock back about 15 years, I found myself almost by accident fronting the media for one of the high street banks in the financial crisis. So I've got a back full of scars, having defended probably the most hated brand in the most hated sector in the biggest economic down cycle we ever had. So a lot of tips and tricks that we built up in those times. So it would be good to share those with you today.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you very much, Peter. Okay, so to get started, do you just want to tell us a little bit about how business owners can ensure journalists tell the story from their perspective?
Yeah, so, you know, the biggest challenge that we meet with people who've not done much media before is the word confidence. And a lot of people say to me, how do we build up that confidence to make sure that I land what I want to land rather than getting dragged down the cul-de-sac of what the journalist wants to land? And there's two things that I would say have in your head. First of all, that this is your gig, right? So this is your 5 minutes of fame. This is your opportunity to say what you want to say, to land your messages. Then the other thing to recognize is that I always say, you're the journalist pimp. You're there to help them get good broadcast as well. All the journalist needs to do is get good broadcast. That's what they get paid for. You know, that's their career, the column inches they get, the broadcast they get, the viewers they get. You know, that's what's so important to them. They don't have a personal vendetta against you. They're not there to try and catch you out, but they do have to create good broadcast and good stories. So you are there to help them get that story, but make sure it's your story they get. So have those two things in your head before anything else. It's your gig, it's your story that you want to land, but you're there to help them get a good story. That's the mindset that you've got to go into an interview with.
Absolutely. And you touched on it a little bit there, Peter. So how can interviewees build on this confidence to make sure they land their angle?
Well, a lot of it is knowing what you want to say, right? So in your prep period, I would say do 4 things in your prep period. Don't just rock up to an interview without having thought about how you're going to do it or any prep. And in my day, you know, when I was representing the banking side, I'd spend maybe 3 or 4 hours preparing for a 4, 5, 6 minute interview. And in that period, the first thing to think about is why you're doing it. So what's your objective in having this conversation with the media? A lot of people will just rock up and think it's going to flow in their direction. If you have not got a very clear objective for doing an interview with a journalist, don't do it. So it's either brand promotion or it's brand preservation or something you want to get over. You have a message to give. If you can't work out what that message is and you can't work out why you're doing it and you're just doing it for the ego trip, don't do it because it'll go wrong. So number 1 is the objective. Number 2 is think about your audience. Frequently, you'll be talking to different audiences. So, you know, on the financial side, you can go from Bloomberg right the way down to 5 Live or a local newspaper. It's a different audience. So address that different audience in the way the audience expects to be talked to. You are trying to land a message. You probably won't land a message. You probably land an impact. And you've probably got 2 or 3 seconds worth of impact that you're going to land, whether that's a print story or whether it's broadcast, whether it's TV, radio, whatever it is. You create an impact and you're trying to get your brand recognized for that impact. So think what language your audience speaks and speak to that language. So I know you had a couple of days ago, you had Tech Kofi on as being an interviewer who was fairly mainstream, BBC, World Service. You would have a certain way that you would address that interview because the audience has a certain perception of you. You know, if I was on 5 Live at 5:30, 5:45 in the morning, you'd find me in a little box of a studio with the earmuffs on, with a microphone in front of me, talking quite quickly, no tie on, open neck shirt, which isn't me, no jacket on, but that's the 5 Live audience. 20 minutes later, you could see me or hear me on Radio 4, and I'd have a tie on, a jacket on, and I'd be talking much slower. Different audience. So who's your audience? Address the audience. Then the other 2 things that you think about in your prep are, what is it you want to say? And then what is it that you don't want to say? So that's your prep. Get your head in the prep stage.
Totally. And how can you kind of structure the agenda to make sure you're getting every point across?
Yeah, so that's the 3rd bit in this prep, which is the stories that I want to get over. All right. So get clear in your head what your messages are. And I would normally say never have more than 3 messages. 2 is ideal. 4 people will forget. 1 is probably not quite enough. So it's 2 or 3 messages that you want to land. And as I said before, you're probably landing an impact here rather than a really clear message. So if you look, let's look at the government coronavirus briefings that they've been doing until last night. They have been creating an impact around, are we in control of this? Do people know what they're doing? Very, very few people will know what they actually can do, right? Very few. So if you run a bit of a survey after this session now about, do you know what you can do? I'll guarantee you've got a whole raft of different things. So can I go and see my grandkids? I don't know. Can I go on holidays? I don't know. But I have an impact view of, is the government in control of this? That's exactly what you're doing in this interview. So 2 points that you're trying to land in this that create that impact, or 3 points, something like that. Get those really clear in your head. All right. And if you get those clear, and that's what you keep bouncing back to, and we'll perhaps go into this when we say, how do you actually do the interview to make sure you stick on these subjects? But first of all, be really clear about what those messages are that you want to land. Short, sharp messages. You hear people going into interviews without having thought this through, and they'll just ramble and talk, and the impact and the takeaway is, well, we don't know what people were talking about. Yeah. So really clear about those subjects you want to land. The flip side of that, which is the 4th bit in your prep, is what do you not want to have to answer on? So we've all got dark pasts. We'll all have some secrets that we never want to be asked anything about. What are they? And make sure you have closed down statements for any of those so that you can then flip to the ones that you do want to talk about. And this is all about 2 words that I have in any interview. 1 is, I want to control this. And 2 is, I want to remove anything that might destabilize me. So if I'm trying to land messages, I have to take away anything that might take me off my game. So something as physical as, I don't want a glass of water next to me when the microphone's there because I might knock it over, right the way through to, what is it somebody might have found on Google or Facebook that actually might be a dark story for me. It's interesting, we're working with a client at the moment that we're going to be doing some media coaching with. They don't know that I have found in Google from 12 years ago the fact they've got a criminal record. They don't think anybody knows about that. There's another tip actually, which is always turn your phone off before you go into an interview. So you'll remember that one. So always look at those things that you're not happy about what you might be asked. So you have close downs to those. So get your messages sorted out and then have the close downs that you don't want.
And would you recommend, just touching on that, to have maybe a backup plan or things to sort of deflect if you do start losing control of the interview?
You're not going to lose control of it. If you're properly prepared for this, you are going to stay in control of this, and you're going to keep bouncing back to your 2 or 3 subjects. There is one tip that you can have, which is really valuable in terms of if I am lost. All right. So some people freeze. There are some people I work with who go on television, and if you have your 3 points, I'll say, write them on your fingers. So if you write the things on your fingers, you don't forget what the particular items are that you want to be talking about. Nobody ever sees your fingers that are in front of you. The other tip to have, though, is have a default statement in your pocket. I would always have a 10-second default statement, which just is a word perfect statement that I've got that I can just trot out if I have to trot it out. word perfect statement. If I don't understand the question, or if I haven't heard the question, something I can say that's got credibility and sounds as though I'm back in control. So you never freeze. Firstly, you know what you're going to be talking about because you've worked out what your topics are. And secondly is you've got something in your pocket which enables you to, revert back to something if you do get stuck. So you don't lose control.
Perfect. Well, that's really interesting. Thank you, Peter. So going back to the kind of first stages, how can business owners find the right journalist to work with and then reach out to them?
Well, you can do this in various different ways. Most businesses will use a fairly affordable wire service to distribute their comments. If you want to spend £4,000 or £5,000 a month, you can go and get a PR agency. Not many people want to do that. And what we built in JournoLink is that online platform that you can do it all yourself. So for about £50 a month, you can do all your press release, distribute it, respond to journalists, engage with journalists. You can do all that online yourself with loads of tips. So we go right the way from an expensive PR agency, and nothing wrong with those if you've got the budget, but most people haven't got the budget. So we go from right the way down to a platform like JournoLink that we've got about 8,000 businesses using now. Now, when you put releases through, what we do on JournoLink is provide analytics to say which journalists are looking at you. And we don't necessarily tell you where you're covered, but we'll tell you which journalists are looking at you. So you can actually make friends with those journalists. So you can do this in two ways. You can do it by straight distribution, and we circulate to about 10,000 journalists, or you can pick out 2 or 3 journalists that you want to build a relationship with. And a lot of local businesses will choose 2 or 3 local journalists that they want to buddy up with to be able to share their stories. And that happens in trade as well. So if you're in a particular trade, then you might want to talk to a trade journal as well. So some pick that out, some use a much broader wire service. The most important thing though is landing those messages that you want to land. And that comes into play when you're actually doing the interview itself.
So in terms of these lists, Peter, how much do they usually cost?
Well, to buy a list of journalists?
Yeah.
On our system, we charge £40 to an agency to get a list of journalists. But if you don't want to pay anything, just go down to WH Smith and look at the titles that you want to engage with, and have a look, and it'll have what the addresses are, the email addresses of the people you want to deal with. Look at another thing that you can do is you look at similar businesses, look at the press releases they put out and the coverage they've had in the papers, and then pick the journalist out. And you can normally see either the Twitter address of those journalists or the email address of those journalists. Don't expect everyone to reply. We circulate, we've got about 10,000 journalists on the platform that we use. Typically, we'll circulate to about 3,000, 4,000. Of those, about 10% will read it, 10% will open it, and 10% of those will come back to you. So you might just get half a dozen people that are really going to use it. And that's it's a numbers game. So don't expect journalists all the time to think that you're the only thing that they're going to use.
So in terms of reach out to these journalists, how can you build a really strong pitch?
That's the story, right? So a journalist will always look at any story on the basis of, is my readership going to read this? Or are my viewers going to look at me? Or are my listeners going to turn off or stay on and listen to me? So there has to be a story. This is the good broadcast, right? So this is creating the good story. So if you send something to a journalist that says, look, we've got a launch of a new product next week. Can you please send everybody that reads your paper to us? They're probably not going to use it. That's promotion, that's salesy. But if you've got a really good news story, for instance, we've just taken 5 people on post-coronavirus. So we're actually increasing our employment rather than reducing it. That's a story. Yeah. And if that's in a local environment, journalists are going to pick that up and use it. And we know, I'll tell you today, there'll be a raft of stuff going out today for the tourism industry. We know that the Prime Minister tomorrow is going to say quarantine is going to reduce for people coming back from Spain, France, and all the other places. We're anticipating that. So you'll see a pile of stuff on tourism today. And we've already seen coming through the JournoLink lines today, several journalists asking for businesses that are involved in tourism. yesterday the government relaxed its rules on bed and breakfasts and holiday homes. So already that's trending at the moment. So get something that's trending, and you're probably going to capture the journalist's interest as well.
I know I can speak from personal experience, Peter. When we get press releases in, we always say, like, so what? So if it's a story about, increased turnover, we'll get back. And if it is a good story and we think there's a bit more there, we'll say, so what does this mean? What are you going to do for it? What does it mean to the sector? What does it mean to the local area? So I think that's always a good.
It's quite a good test. That the so what test is quite a good one. I always say to people, when you've written it, give it to your 12-year-old to read, and if they're interested in it and read it till the end, you've got half a chance. If they sort of read the first sentence and turn the telly back on, then you've not captured the interest. The other little tip on this as well, actually, and you'll get it from the UME perspective. When a lot of journalists see a press release coming through to their email address, and some journalists will get 200-300 emails a day of businesses saying, please, will you promote my brand? Mm-hmm. When they look at it, a lot of them look at it on their phone. And on your phone, you've got about 35 characters before you lose the headline. Yeah. So get your headline really crisp and provocative, and in about 35 characters if you can. So what you're trying to do is hook the interest of the journalist straight away. And if your headline does that quickly on an iPhone, then you've half a chance that they're going to read to the next bit. And then you've got to hook them the whole way through.
That brings us on to our next question, actually, Peter. So how would you go about structuring a headline that's going to grab the attention of journalists?
So my rule of thumb here is anything that won't land you in prison. Right? So the more provocative it is, and the more sort of hooky it is, the more interest it is, then use it. But don't make it completely irrelevant to the story. If you make it completely irrelevant to the story, the journalist's going to work that out really quickly and put you in the spam box. But you're trying to hook them. So pretty provocative. If this is about a local story, then put the region in there or the locality. So, if it's in the Northeast, then it could be Northeast business, or, it could be Middlesbrough business, or, whatever. If there's an area, that's worth putting the headline, because that will capture some of your local journalists. Mm-hmm. And that's really quite valuable. But make it crisp, make it crisp, make it provocative, make it something that, if you were opening the paper in the morning and that headline, would your eyes be attracted to it? That's the key for the headline.
Do you have any kind of examples you can think of off the top of your head of particularly good headlines that you've seen over the years? Yeah,
this is completely politically incorrect, but the ones that I've seen picked up by more journalists than anything else, one that had a swear word in it, and the other one that had lingerie in it, right? So, and you can understand why. So, it's just that, it's the so what test again, isn't it, actually? If it's, I'm going to read that, that's quite interesting. It's the old man bites dog story, isn't it? Dog bites man, nobody's interested, but the headline man bites dog, you're going to read it.
Definitely. And Peter, we've had a question come in from one of our audience. So somebody has asked, if I'm not happy with the way a story has been written, can I have it retracted?
If it's been written and it's out there, close your eyes to it and move on. Often a print story will not necessarily be exactly how you wanted it to be written, but it's been written. You can, if it's untrue and there's falsehoods in it, then you can go to the newspaper or the journalist and saying, could you retract this or print a correction? My advice generally is move on, because if you go for the correction, that actually makes people look at it even more.
Yeah.
So you're as well just moving on, but it comes down as well to landing your story right. So what are your 2 points? If you're in a TV or a radio interview, for instance, a lot of the time, and the same with print in a way, a lot of media coaches will say, always ask the first question before you actually start the interview. I never do that. And I always say to people, don't ask the first question. And it's quite simply because I know what my first answer is going to be. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to be thrown by a journalist asking me a question that I don't want. I know what my first answer is going to be. And my first answer is going to be taking that question and flipping it into the 2 or 3 messages that I want to land in this interview. So I'm setting the agenda in my first answer. So the question you've asked me is important, and I'll mention it. But actually what's important today is 1, 2, 3. And you get about 15 or 20 seconds before you get interrupted by an interviewer. So you can land your agenda then. And once you've landed that agenda, that means that it's quite legitimate for you to bounce back to those topics throughout the interview. And it's a really, really useful technique, particularly if you're on a live TV or a live radio one. You know, I'll get back to, this is your gig. And you can just keep bouncing back to, I call them lily pads, bouncing back to these lily pads throughout the whole story. And because the listener or the viewers heard them at the outset, they expect you to talk about them. And 9 times out of 10, the interviewer will actually ask you about them. You're doing the job for them. You're telling them what we're going to be talking about, and you're helping them ask you questions that you're going to give them good broadcast about.
Yeah.
Often they'll follow that line through. And that's how you get written what you want to get written, because that's what you've been talking about.
That's great. Thanks very much, Peter. So we've had another question come in. Somebody has asked, if I would come to JournoLink to help my business, where would I start? I've got no experience with the media and I wouldn't know what kind of help to ask for, but I do want to build my business's brand.
www.journolink.com, and it will tell you everything. So we built it very much for businesses who are at that early stage and have no idea where to go. And what we found is businesses don't know what to write, they don't know when to write it, they don't know how to write it, and they don't know how to distribute it. So the distribution will sort all that out for you. You just use the template, put your story down. There's lots of tips and tricks in there on how to get your headline right and how to get the body of it right. In terms of when to write it, we have a calendar on the platform that you can look at, and that'll prompt you on what is likely to be trending in the news over the next few days. And that looks at government data that's coming out. It looks at national days. So, when it's National White Chocolate Day, for instance, or when it's Sandwich Day, or when it's the Yorkshire Bike Race, and all, we're prompting you on those sort of things. And we also we also put a load of award programs in there that you should be applying for. The very good way to get in the media is to apply for an award program, get shortlisted, and win it. Local media loves that. So we're prompting you on the things that might be coming through. So we're helping you on where the news might be for the day. But yeah, seriously, I mean, just register on www.journolink.com. We don't charge you anything to register. We only ask for a payment when you start putting stuff through. So you can go on there and you can have a look at it and see if it's answering all the questions that you want answered.
So Peter, from your experience, what difference does it make putting this time and resource into building a media presence for your business?
So PR, so media PR is, for me, it's a critical part of your marketing mix. It's not instead of anything else you do in marketing, but it sits alongside your social, it sits alongside your email campaigns, any sales that you're doing, any advertising, and it's a key component in that. A lot of the businesses I speak to say, look, we do social, so it's fine, we don't need to do anything else. And then you say, well, how many followers have you got? And they say, oh, we got 65 followers. And then I say, well, what if we made that 10,000?
Yeah.
Well, how do you do that? Well, what you're doing in PR is going out to a market that isn't your immediate follower, whereas your social tends to be immediate followers. Mm-hmm. So PR sits alongside your social. Don't do one without the other. And whenever you do PR, make sure you cover it in the right social channels. So if you're on Instagram, make sure it's got the picture with a comment. If you're in Twitter, seen our press release today and put a link on there. If it's Facebook, extract an element out of it. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we're just launching into JournoLink now the ability for you to put a Twitter comment out through JournoLink at the same time as you're putting your press release out. So, you can schedule a Twitter comment at the same time as your actual press release. And just sharing a few secrets that should be coming up in the next week or two.
Perfect. I think as well with social media, sometimes you find that a lot of your followers are already customers. So PR is a great way to find new customers.
Yeah, pretty well all of your followers is the whole point. They'll be friends or customers already. Mm-hmm. The PR side is all about how do I push that out into into a bigger audience. The other thing to bear in mind about PR is that in social, one of the things I learned when I was doing the banking side was that nobody believed what I said. Everybody thought I was spinning it and just telling you what I wanted you to hear. But as soon as a journalist repeated what I said, suddenly the audience believed it. So most of the time when I was being interviewed, I was trying to move the interviewer to ask me to summarize what I've said. So yeah. I could say, look, we lend loads of money in the high street. Nobody believed a word of it. But as soon as I got an interview on Jeff Randall or BBC to say, so actually you're the bank that's lending money to businesses in the high street, the world believed it. Yeah. So actually having an independent journalist writing good things about you is way more valuable than you putting an advert in a magazine, or even putting it on your own social.
Yeah.
So your friends
Totally.
believe you, your followers believe you, your customers believe you, but other people won't. You know, when we go and buy something now, if we go buy something on Amazon, the first thing we look at are what other people have said about those products. We believe other people much more than we believe ourselves. So the general belief is it's about 4.8 times more valuable to have a positive PR story than it is just putting a straight advert in a paper.
Makes sense, totally. So we've had another question from our audience. Somebody has asked, if I were to sign up to JournoLink, would I be able to learn how to create a press release and build my skills so I can run my own PR for my business?
Absolutely. Exactly what it's there for. The templates are there for you. The helping hands are there for you. The prompts are there for you. You absolutely could do it. Yeah, don't be scared of doing it. It's, you know, a lot of people think that PR is a dark art. Honestly, it's not. You just need the confidence to just get hold of it, look what you've got to do, and then just write your release and send it out.
And how has it changed, Peter, from this whole, you know, the transition from print to digital? How has that had an effect on PR?
There is much more of a demand for it now. So what you find is that whereas before a local newspaper might come out every week and they had to fill in enough columns for a weekly newspaper, now, and it's the same with the, you know, if it's a daily, you know, one of the dailies that come out, they start to fill those columns. But now with the digital papers, there's so much more volume that's got to go through and got to get replaced during a day, that the journalists are always screaming out for more and more and more and more. And we know some of the stuff that goes through JournoLink, we watch it in our back end about what's happening with it. And we can see a press release that's come through JournoLink, we can see who's looked at it, and then we can look on their website and see it's just been straight copied and pasted straight on to a title's web page. And we know it's just been copied and pasted on because we might have had a spelling mistake in it. And that spelling mistake is in the article that's gone online as well. So you've got more and more and more journalists now just looking for the stuff coming through and then copying, pasting, putting it on just to run their digital channel as well as the print one.
Yeah.
A lot of people say to me, is print dead? I don't think it is. You know, I think we still have a big appetite for print, particularly in the, you know, the lifestyle stuff, the health stuff, things like that, and the locals. We still got, you know, people like to sit down and read stuff. So for me, it's still there for years to come. But there is all this digital stuff going on now. Not just digital, it's a lot of bloggers as well. So we get a lot of bloggers picking up stuff out of JournoLink. And again, we watch who's looking at you. And about 60-70% of the pickup that we get out of JournoLink is coming through what we record actually as a guest. So it's somebody from social media and blogosphere that's come in to take that article.
Yeah, we've actually just had a question from the audience that links to that, Peter. So somebody has asked, are guest bloggers a good idea? I've been considering them, but I'm not sure whether it would detract from the brand voice that we usually have with our content.
Yeah, that's your risk. There's two risks in using bloggers. One, it might not necessarily be your brand voice that you want to maintain. The other is you might well get a phone call or an email from that blogger saying, I'll print it if you give me £50 or if you send me a free or whatever it is. You can make that judgment call. It's all noise, you know, it's all profile. It's all getting the backlinks, you know, it's all the social media type stuff and the SEO type stuff. So it's helpful. And, you know, there are more bloggers in the country now than there are journalists. So, yes, it is helpful to be working with bloggers. But the one thing that you must be clear about is that your brand feel is maintained. So always have a look at what else that blogger has written before you commit to it yourself.
And I guess, could you give them a brief of how you want the kind of the style of the content to be?
Yeah, you can do it. Yeah, sure, and you can do that to a journalist as well. But you are in the hands of the people that are actually writing it as to whether they actually follow that brief. So your big risk is that they don't follow that brief. You know, there are three. Whenever I'm doing an interview, there are three things I say to people. If you're doing a print interview, nothing is off the record, right? So you'll get journalists very regularly say to you, "Yeah, just off the record. Can we have a chat before we actually get going?" Trust me, there is nothing off the record. The only time I'll go off the record with a journalist is when I say to the journalist before we start, "Can we go off the record and you tell me what you're trying to get?" But I'm not going off the record. You know, I'm telling you to. I'm not going to do that. So nothing off the record. Don't get caught out. on a radio interview, if there's a microphone anywhere near, it is on, and you are on live. Always make that assumption. If you've gone down to a local studio, the second you walk into that studio, assume you are being recorded.
Okay.
And if you're on TV, the second you go anywhere near the building where you're going to be filmed, there's a TV camera on, right? It's not just when they say, okay, we're live now, assume you've been covered. So, yes, you can try and script out to a journalist or a blogger how you want things to be, but trust me, nothing's off the record and they'll do whatever they want to do.
And on that, I suppose it's the same if you, like you were saying before, with things that you don't want to be mentioned. I assume that if you were to go to a journalist and say, okay, interview me, but don't ask this, this, or this, you're going to be asked them.
Guess what they're going to ask you? Yeah. Guess what they're going to do? I mean, sometimes you do that. And, I remember in my banking days, there were so many things that actually we didn't want to be challenged on. And we would, we'd say to the BBC, yes, okay, Peter will come on, but actually we don't want to be challenged on that, and that. My assumption was always, I am going to be challenged on that, and that. So we've said that's not the story. This is the story, but I'd always have closed down statements already for those items that we said we don't want to. So, I mean, it could, for instance, have been about derivatives mis-selling or LIBOR fixing or, overcharging. And my response would always be, I can't talk about that. That's in the hands of the regulators. You must ask the regulator. So I'd always have that closed down but we try and set the parameters of the interview. And in fairness, we try and say, look, this is the story that we really want to have a conversation with you about. Most decent journalists will follow that line. So it's always worth that conversation. It's probably better to say, this is what we want to talk about, rather than say, but these three things we don't want to. Because
you're almost advertising the story.
So you don't want to do that.
We've had another question in, Peter. So somebody said, if I'm writing a press release, is it basically an advert for my business? Or how do I do that whilst telling the story at the same time? Yeah,
great question. What the journalists hate is you trying to do an advert about your business. And that'll get dropped straight away. All right. We know from some of the machine learning that we build into JournoLink, we know certain words that come up in a press release will actually get blocked by firewalls or the spam. So if you put things like sales or promotion, that actually gets blocked out before it gets to a lot of the journalists. Some of the main titles, 4 or 5 of the key daily papers that you would see, just block them out. So be really clever and careful about how you do the advertising. And that's not really the purpose of your PR. If you want to do an advert, go pay for an advert. What your PR is getting your brand recognized for what you do and have people say things about that brand. By all means, you can put in the last sentence, doing what we're doing, having launched this, there's a sale at so-and-so, last sentence, right? Yeah. It's not an advert in the article. Get back to the whole thing about why does a journalist want it? Because it's giving them good copy, giving them a good broadcast, and it's news. I mean, right now, it's quite interesting. Right now, there are a whole raft of businesses that have signed up to JournoLink and they want to get the message out. Their shops are open again. And they want to get the message out about what they're doing to get you back in the shops. They want to get the message out about how they've managed the health side of it. They want to get you back into what new lines they've got and what you can get online. Now, you might say that's a bit of advertising. I don't think it is. I think that's local news, and that's quite legitimate to put that through. But build it up as that news story about so-and-so shop opens on the 4th of July, or pub opens on the 4th of July. To celebrate the opening, there will be live music in the garden, beer's got 10p off it, and blah, 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 blah. That's okay. It's not going to get picked up by mainstream, but it will get picked up by local. That's okay. But don't just go with a straight advert for the fun of an advert, because that'll get blocked.
Yeah, definitely. Somebody else has asked a question, Peter. So somebody said, why would anybody want to be interviewed by someone like Piers Morgan? Is it just about getting large audiences?
The only two people I refused to be interviewed by. One was Robert Peston, and the other one was that dreadful guy that did University Challenge, whose name I forget now. But there were 2 of them who were absolutely ragged. I did quite a lot with John Humphreys, and a lot of people said, never be interviewed by John Humphreys because he's going to turn the knife on you. He never turned the knife. I gave him good broadcast. Sure, he was challenging, but it's up to you to be equally energetic back in getting your messages over. So, you know, one of the things I would always focus on really, really heavily with those quite aggressive journalists. So, you know, people on Jeff Randall's show, for instance, and Today program would be quite aggressive coming back. And I would always focus on being at least 2% more animated than the journalist. All right, you don't want to embarrass the journalist. You don't want to, you know, hit them back and argue or anything like that. But you want to be as energetic as them in that dialogue. So I'd always, if they up their voice, I would up my voice. If they calm down, I'd follow it down. I'd follow the speed of their diction. So I'm in the groove all the time and just leading it all the time. But look, if you take your first answer and set your first, your 2 or 3 lily pads that you're going to bounce back to, you know, when you're on with the Piers Morgan, you can keep bouncing back to those. And as long as you're giving them good, energetic broadcast, they're delighted. Yeah. You know, they don't have a personal vendetta against you. You know, they'll have a pop at the politicians. The best one to watch, and if you want to watch someone that does this to perfection, watch Peter Mandelson. You know, his body language is great. He can turn a journalist right round, but he's not disingenuous with them either. Mm-hmm. But he'll follow that energy, and he'll follow the animation throughout an interview. And that's you know, that's not accidental. That is well rehearsed and very, very, very intentional. That's really interesting, Peter. Thank you very much. So just moving on to our last question, how are JournoLink currently supporting business owners with reaching out to the media and building relationships? And do you have any particular examples of this? Well, we've done one thing in particular during the coronavirus outbreak, and that was we set a platform up which enabled businesses just to put what we call a coronavirus shout through that to journalists on, you know, what they were doing within the lockdown period. And we didn't charge anything for that. We just let businesses do that. And we had a lot of businesses do that. We shot those out to journalists. Some of the journalists picked up a couple of articles written in the Sunday Times about those businesses. We've just changed that now that we're coming out of lockdown, to a free shout that says, so what are you doing now? You're out of the lockdown. So we've been helping businesses with that. But, you know, been just very active in trying to help the businesses engage with the media. As I say, we've got a lot of small business journalists on there, a lot of trade, different sector journalists on there. So just really trying to help businesses reach out to those journalists and get their messages out there and grow their brand. You know, we talked about the sort of £5,000 a month agency platforms, agencies that you can use. If you use JournoLink, you're working out something, you know, £300-400 a year will get you all you need to get your messages out there. That's great. Thank you so much, Peter. You've shared some really, really interesting things with us today, and I think it's going to be really valuable for our audience. So is there anything you'd like to add before we go? I'm just going to reiterate, nothing's off the record. The microphone is always on, and the camera is always on. And, you know, I've got sort of war stories from things that went wrong. You heard, you know, when we were talking, you heard the phone go. You know, these things happen during interviews. Interestingly enough, the mobile's away, but you can't turn your landline off. So it will ring. I was doing a live interview with somebody last week, and my grandkids decided to FaceTime me. Of course, you know, the laptop started ringing and he couldn't turn it off. So you get things like that. So just think about removing anything that might destabilize you. And if something like that does happen, you've got to make light of it, and you've got to, you know, recognize it, make a story of it. But basically, camera's always on, mic's always on, and there's nothing off the record. But, you know, make the most of PR. You know, JournoLink's a platform there that you can use. It's not expensive. It's very functional, and we get the results. So, you know, have a go at using it. Have a look at it. That's great. Thank you so much, Peter. And thanks everybody else for watching. If you'd like any more information, we've got a number of articles and how-to guides on marketing and branding. If you just go to our website, www.weareumi.co.uk. So thank you, Peter. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.